All right. Hello and welcome to another very special episode of the Mike Sennello Show. Tonight we're going to be having on Representative Steve Harding, who's going to be joining us in just a quick second. He's running for the 30th Senate District seat here in Connecticut, which represents a bunch of towns in the northwest corner, one of which is New Milford, and that's what we focus on in this town, so that's what we're going to go over. Before we do, I just have a quick update of things. For those of you, I just want to give a quick shout out and a thanks to everyone who checked out, as I've donned my Lions Club hat, to everyone who joined in and stopped by to visit the Lions Club booth last night at Trunk or Treat. It seemed like it was something of a hit, our booth, and it was really cool to see some familiar faces at that event. We can talk about that event another time. Just wanted to offer my thanks to everyone who came out and made that event a fun thing to do. So without further ado, let's bring in tonight's guest. Steve, thanks for coming in.
Mike, thanks as always for having me. I look forward to being on your show all the time. So it's a great opportunity to talk to you and talk to hopefully my future constituents in New Milford.
All right, cool. So before we get started, as I always do with all my guests, let folks know how they can reach you, how they can follow you.
Yep, absolutely. They can follow me at Harding for Senate on Facebook. Just follow me on that page, Harding for Senate. Follow me on Twitter at Harding for Senate 30 at Harding for Senate 30, and then also on my website at hardingforsenate30.com. So those are the three main avenues that I usually reach out to my voters and constituents, and those are the three areas you can find me.
Cool. So folks know Steve has been on the show, so there's a lot of stuff that I would normally do with guests that I'm just going to breeze right by because Steve's already been on the show at least once. And speaking of that, Steve, I'm going to put you on the spot. If you get elected, sure. You have made a promise that I would love to hear you make public.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If I'm fortunate enough to be elected, I'd be happy to make this a monthly appearance and go over what's going on in the Senate, what's going on in the overall legislature. It's a great way to reach out to my constituents and update them in detail, which your show allows, which is great, to go over legislation and go over what's going on in Hartford, which is so important. So would be happy to be on your show, and we'll make that commitment and we'll follow through on that if I'm fortunate to be elected.
Awesome. So a monthly Senate update show with Steve Harding. That'd be awesome.
Happy to do that. Happy to do it.
All right. So you first made this promise to me when we ran into each other about 2 weeks ago at a debate you had last week, or 2 weeks ago, yep, up in Torrington. So today I really want to focus on that debate and the theme of debates in general, because we're getting kind of close to election day. Excuse me. Man, that Snickers bar is not sitting all that well. And we've already had you on. So to the overall themes of your campaign and the backstory here, we've already gone over that. Folks, do check that out. And so folks know, just like we do with any guests, there will be live Q&A. This is your opportunity to hold these candidates to the fire. This is your opportunity to access your candidates. If I'm softballing Steve, this is your chance to get in the questions you have that I'll be forwarding over to Steve when we cap this all off. So again, before you forget them, just write them down. Even if we answer those questions, and we can just breeze by them if we wind up answering them in our conversation. So I want to talk about that debate with Ava. And I want to start off with this post that I think a bunch of you have seen. Let me get that pulled up. I want to start off with this post, and I just have to really quickly crop something real quick just so we can get this, make sure that this is all nice and even and square. And there, I put out a post in a few days after that that listed some quotes from Steve and from his opponent, and that's what that post looked like. I don't know, Steve, if you got a chance to see that, but here are those 4 quotes, and I'll read them off for folks who may be listening instead of watching. On the Harding side, there's 4 quotes here. Quote, "Zoning should be local. I oppose statewide zoning," end quote. Quote, "If you're finding dealers who are selling fentanyl, they need to go to jail because they are killing people," end quote. On the subject of electric vehicles not contributing to the gas tax collections, quote, "I would caution against adding further fees," end quote. on income tax rates for businesses and individuals. Quote, I would fight against any tax increases anywhere, end quote. And then Ava, we also had, Ms. Zimmerman, we also had 4 quotes from her. By the way, folks, these are all of the quotes that I was fast enough to write down. So if it seems like there's some sort of a bias in here, fine, because they were the ones that I thought to write down. I'm not the fastest writer. So these are the ones that I had a chance to actually write down and bring to you. Quote, a 12-year-old knows right from wrong, end quote. On affordable housing, quote, we don't want corporate greed or capitalism to take over. And then on electric vehicles not contributing to gas tax collections, quote, our environment is in peril right now. This emergency happened yesterday, end quote. On income tax rates for businesses and individuals, trickle-down economics doesn't work, end quote. So first things first, Steve, I'll just ask the most obvious question that came to me when I was listening to these debates when it comes to these quotes. Can 12-year-olds consent?
Well, no. I honestly don't know the context for that. There's so many quotes going back and forth in these debates that I can't say what context that quote was used in. But obviously there is a force in Hartford, and I can tell you this as a state representative, to dwindle away parental rights. And we've seen it in Hartford on a number of issues, whether it be health insurance related issues. There was a bill that was actually passed this past year in which parents would receive an explanation of benefits and would be liable for paying their children's medical bills related to that insurance benefits that were being paid out. Yet you would not be able to see some of your children's medical trips. So you'd see the bill, but you wouldn't actually see what your child was doing at the doctor or at a therapist or a psychiatrist or wherever. And so there's been this continuous effort to strip away rights from parents. And again, I can't say exactly. I don't remember exactly what context that quote was being used in, but from a context in terms of what's going on in Hartford and what we've seen and what I've seen over the past 6 years, there is this effort to strip parents from their authorities in regards to raising their children. And as a father to 2 young children, it's disturbing to me. And it's something that we need to be cognizant of. It's something that I'll certainly be cognizant of in the Senate. Is parental rights. It's very important to me, and I think it's very important to any parent that you speak with, making sure that they're able to raise their children.
So I don't really want to get to talk too much about your opponent since she's not here to defend herself.
Correct.
So that's why I kind of phrased the question I did towards you. And Ava, if you want to come on to the show, you're a candidate running for office in an office that directly relates to New Milford. Happy to have you on the show. And then, that'll be her opportunity to expand, to answer that question, to expand on what that context might be. I'm not going to put words into her mouth as far as what that context was, especially here tonight. But I'll bring up those quotes again because the only thing I'm going to follow up on that, Steve, just so you can see them. Anything you'd like to add when it comes to these quotes that are up here?
Well, I mean, one of the things is talking about zoning being local. I mean, that is one of the biggest aspects of my campaign. And there's a quote from my opponent about corporate greed, and I did mention this in the debate. That a lot of the time the corporate greed, you want to talk about corporate greed related to affordable housing, it comes a lot of times from the developers themselves who use 8-30G in inconsistent ways in regards to what the law is written for. 8-30G has essentially allowed these developers to put up whatever they want and not follow any local zoning or planning laws. So it actually details the corporate greed that we're talking about. Is that
then is that corporate greed, or is that the fact that bill exists, which allows for these avoidances?
Correct. I don't think it's necessarily corporate greed necessarily, right? But when you use that term, if you're talking about individuals, taking advantage of communities, which generally is what you'd look at corporate greed as. Uh, 8-30G enables that. It absolutely enables. That's the reason I fight against the law and want to see it reformed at the least, is because it runs contrary to what the noble aspects of the law may be, and that is developers basically, as I said, utilizing the law to get around local zoning laws, so they can put up what they want at a cheaper price. They don't have to follow zoning restrictions, and they can put up their development without having to follow any of these regulations. And a lot of the times it comes down to the community doesn't want to see what they want to put up because they want to see them follow local zoning laws. There's a reason why they're there. There's a reason why our neighbors are there determining what gets built and where it gets built, because they want it to conform with what's existing in the community. And they want to preserve open space and the beauty that we have here. So that's one thing I wanted to expand on, because it's an important part of my campaign, is making sure that we see zoning local. And we talked a little bit about what we're seeing in Hartford, and there has been an effort in Hartford as well to implement statewide zoning, to implement more laws like 8-30G that strip away local control from our zoning and planning boards. And I think that's a huge problem that we're going to be facing in the next legislative session.
So let's press that then. Why should zoning be local?
Well, I think that we just mentioned why. I think a lot of the reason we live here and we move here is because of the open space and beauty that we have here. And if we
So hang
if
on.
we
So
strip,
if a law comes through that supports what you just said at the state level, why should we have that at the state level, and as opposed to getting rid of it at the state level, where it would then devolve to
should we
to
have?
the towns?
Oh, I don't think I really don't like seeing any state zoning laws. I'd like to see local zoning laws. Um, so what I mean by state zoning laws is laws that dictate what gets built at the state level, and again strips away local control. So what it says is that the zoning or planning doesn't have any say on this, or very limited say on this, and the state determines basically what gets built based upon the law. So what I'm saying is less state laws, more local zoning laws. And the good thing about that is your neighbors determine what gets built. So if they want to see more development, maybe open space preservation isn't important. I don't know areas in the 30th where that is the case. But there may be areas across the state where that may be the case. Then your zoning boards and can enact regulations and that reflect that, and allow developers really to put up whatever they want for the most part. But that should be up to the local communities to make that determination, not the state of Connecticut.
All right, so we're getting some questions coming in. We'll get to them at the end of our conversation. Thanks, folks, for tuning in. Seems like everything's going great on their end, which is a wonderful thing. So, folks, again, just as a reminder, we do live audience Q&A. So if you've got a question for Steve, go ahead, put that in as soon as it comes to you. That way you don't forget about it, and we'll get to all these questions at the end of the show. If you guys are watching on YouTube, guys are watching on Facebook, I'm not gonna bother sharing it at this point. I did the sharing in before the show, so if you guys could help us out to get more people involved in all of this, we'd appreciate all of those shares, for those watching both on YouTube and Facebook. So first things first, I really want to spend some time on debates. In general. By the way, did I give you enough time? Did that answer? Were you able to address, expand on whatever it is you wanted to expand on from those quotes?
Yeah.
All right. So you've been to quite a few debates from what I can tell of things. Not too many of them have been televised or broadcast anyway, which is a bummer. But in terms of format and in terms of how these debates are run, which has been your favorite one, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on why that's been the case.
I think all of them are unique. I mean, I've had generally the same format for most of my quote unquote debates. And as you know, Mike, there's a difference between candidate debates and forums. Forums seem to me be a little more informal. Generally, forums have multiple candidates running for multiple different positions. So you do have your opponent there, but you also have someone, let's say, like Billy Buckby running in his race, and maybe his opponent there, and then Pat Callahan running his race and his opponent there. So uh, candidate forums are different. I tend to um, like them more because I think it's more interactive with the constituents. I think the back and forth is a little better. It's a little less formal, as I mentioned, and I think constituents find out more from their candidates than they would from a debate. Debates tend to get very scripted. Candidates tend to be a little more tense because it's a one-on-one. It's a different structure, and they may not go on a talking point as much as they would in a forum where they're a little more relaxed and a little less formal. So I would actually say, I like candidate forums better. I just find them, I find them more informative, and you get to go into more detail on the issues, and it's not so much of a back and forth. It's much more of a focus on the issues, which I usually think is more informative for the voter. That's just my take, and I'm sure there's some voters out there who say, no, I like a debate because it shows your ability to counter what your opponent is saying. It gives your opponent more of an ability to counter what you're saying and puts you on the kind of the ropes to explain why you voted one way or the other, and that's fair. Um, but again, I find candidate forums are a little more informative because you get to focus more on the issues opposed to just attacking your opponent, which I don't think is as helpful sometimes.
So then, do you think that has to do more with the informal nature of the thing, or is that because there are more people on the table? Like for example, a town hall would be would be something you would expect between only two candidates, right? Mm-hmm. Or the series of candidates for a single position, but it would be they're generally speaking run significantly more informally than our debates.
Correct, and I think it's probably just the format and the fact that it's more informal is the reason why you get to have more of an interaction with the candidates running. I think it's a lot more relaxed, and there's much more of a focus, as I said, on the issues, as opposed to, well, I'm going to say this, and when I say this, I know my opponent is probably going to say this, so I need to be prepared for that. It's much more scripted, which I don't think is good for the voters necessarily. I think you don't need to hear who has better scripted lines necessarily. You want to hear where your candidate stands in the issue so that when you send that person to Hartford, you know how they're going to vote.
But you have been going to a bunch of these. So I want to get your thoughts on, have you heard of what I've been, I don't know if it's common parlance yet, but what I've referred to as the Ron Paul treatment.
No, explain that to me.
So there is a strategy when it comes to campaigning where, and not everybody takes it, and not, I'm not saying it's a good or a bad strategy, where what you do is instead of, let's say, attacking your candidate, you give them the Ron Paul treatment, which is you don't mention them, you don't engage with them, you don't do the debates, you pretend they don't exist, which famously happened to Ron Paul in, I think it was 2012 in the Republican National Conventions, where he was taking, second and third place, and the media outlets just weren't even mentioning. They'd mention first, they'd mention fifth, fourth, sixth, seventh, eighth, but they wouldn't mention him. So, love to get your thoughts on, in terms of a campaign strategy. It seems like you're not giving Ava really the Ron Paul treatment by doing this.
Well, no, I'm certainly willing to debate and have a discussion. As you know, we've had multiple debates. But my focus is not on my opponent, and really, to her credit, my opponent's focus is not on me. It's more about the issues and where we stand. And my theory on it, in terms of me running, is if I can't run on my record, if I can't run in what I believe in, then I shouldn't be running. Having a campaign based around attacking your opponent is just not good strategy, in my opinion, and also doesn't warrant you, in my opinion, to be able to hold office. My campaign has very much been focused on what I can do to better the 30th district, what I can do in many ways to continue the legacy of Senator Minor, what I can do to represent the people that live in the northwest corner of our state, how I can advocate for them, and how we can continue to make the northwest corner of our state beautiful and great and successful. So, and I think I have a good plan for that. I think that my record shows that, and that's pretty much what I'm running on. I'm really not too concerned about, what my opponent does. And to her credit, I don't think she's very concerned about my race. I think she's focusing on what she can do, and that is a good thing. I think it's a very positive thing.
So as far as the debate from that I actually attended, was able to attend 2 weeks ago in Torrington. First things first, we covered it quite a bit in last week's show on Sunday night. Did you get a chance to see last week's show?
I saw some of it. I didn't see all of it, but yeah, I saw a little bit of it. Yep.
So, all right. So is there anything you'd like to add about the debate in general?
One thing that, we didn't get enough time to focus on is police, in my opinion, the police accountability bill particularly. We had really one question on it and had a little bit of an exchange, but that is one thing that is very important to my candidacy. And the reason being is because I'm hearing it from everybody. And, I know that some are pointing to one study that may have come out last year that indicates that crime was down from the previous year. And their basis for that, and I'm not saying what they're reporting is not necessarily factual, because it's facts that they're reporting, but I think it's leaving out a lot of important detail, because what I'm hearing from police officers, every police officer, whether it be a state trooper, whether it be a New Milford police officer, a Brookfield police officer, anywhere across the district or across mostly the state, is that crime is up. And so I think the reason, or part of the reason we're seeing this, is police officers, because of the police accountability bill, are really hamstrung in terms of being able to enforce the laws that we have. And we have a judicial system in the state too, in addition to that is growing more and more lenient in terms of addressing crime. And so that's one of the issues that I kind of I wish we were able to go into a little more detail on. Particularly the qualified immunity aspect of the police accountability bill, the elimination of consent searches in the police accountability bill. These were all aspects of the bill.
Well, then let's stop right there. Let's pick those two things, and let's give you some time to explain that. So, what did the police accountability, in your eyes, what did the police accountability bill do to qualified immunity? And since you admitted you had voted against the police accountability bill, why was that bad?
So basically, the qualified immunity was taking that away. Basically, allows someone to pursue a lawsuit against a police officer, even in circumstances in which they were operating under emergency circumstances, and their actions were not considered really egregious, considering the circumstances, right? They're making life and death decisions in instances, and they're emergency situations. They're making, as we all know, they're making unbelievably difficult decisions in unbelievably difficult situations. And the qualified immunity clause was a clause that really protects all government employees for the most part. And understands, particularly with police, that you're in this particular difficult situation and you're making a very, very difficult decision. And so the reasonability standard is a little bit different, because it's not like me just sitting on the couch watching TV and I'm going to make a decision to do something. Well, that's a very different circumstance than a police officer is in almost every single day. So there was already a provision that basically if you were acting egregiously outside the scope of what you should be doing as a police officer, you already were facing liability. So there was this narrative in Hartford that basically it was impossible because of qualified immunity to sue a police officer. That is untrue. It was absolutely untrue. If you were acting egregiously as a police officer, you absolutely did not qualify for immunity. That's the reason why it was there. So to strip that, it was not, you weren't stripping it from bad police officers. Bad police officers, through the law, based upon qualified immunity, were already facing liability. Now all of a sudden you're taking police officers that are doing the best they can in unbelievably difficult situations and now putting an analysis on them, which is basically impossible, sitting back watching some of these things in retrospect when they have to make unbelievably difficult decisions in an instant. So that was my concern with that.
So from what I understand of qualified immunity, and let me see if the way you're describing qualified immunity is how I would describe it. The way I would describe qualified immunity is that it's not immunity from, first things first, the immunity only applies to civil suits and doesn't apply to criminal cases. where
Correct.
if you're arguing that that an officer acted outside the normal bounds of their duties, right? Obviously, you have a criminal case automatically. There's no immunity from criminal cases in those complaints. However,
Correct.
if your claim is that they acted outside the normal bounds of their duties in a manner that would trigger a civil suit, it has to be outside the normal bounds of their duties. And if it isn't outside that bounds, then they have a qualified immunity from that civil suit against their person. Now, you could sue the department, but if Jim Jones, let's say there's a firefight taking place between two hostile parties or a hostage situation, and Jim Jones, shoots a perpetrator, and in doing so shoots out the glass of some department store. The department store can't sue Jim Jones, but they might be able to sue the department. That's how I've interpreted into qualified immunity. However, if Jim Jones is doing this into the shopping center and blows out the windows, then you can sue Jim Jones. Well, the idea would be that you would lose that qualification because doing this falls outside the bounds of normal operations within the police department.
And so, yeah, you're generally correct. Yes. And in addition to that, not just closing your eyes, but acting egregiously, and being a bad police officer as acting outside the bounds of your duty and would usurp and has legally usurped qualified immunity. So, in my opinion, it was there to protect the good police officers making very difficult decisions. And I think you described it generally correct. And that's the reason why you're seeing, in my opinion, and I think I shouldn't say only my opinion, I'm hearing this directly from police officers. You're seeing police officers either leave early, retire early, and they're not being able to retain some police officers. Some police officers are changing career paths in the middle of their career. And what's even more frightening is some police officers or some potential police officers aren't even bothering applying any longer, and they're looking for another career path. I mean,
which is going to be impossible to quantify too, because you can't quantify something that doesn't exist.
Correctly. So, and we mentioned this in our debate, and the state trooper force is already down to begin with quite substantially. And I think one of the things we talked about, and that's actually one of the things I want to talk about. So the basis I was using in terms of state troopers being down is that Governor Rell.
Time out. We need context here. So at the debate, I don't remember the exact number you gave, but Steve
400.
made the claim that 400, that
Yes.
the state troopers' offices across Connecticut are understaffed by, you said 400 state troopers.
Correct.
And I said in the show last week, I'd like to know where that number came from and what that's based on. So
that was
go ahead.
Good question. Very good question. And once you said that, I said, you know what? I should have actually given context for that. So I'm happy you said it. So yeah, Governor Rell, in conjunction with the legislature, passed a law that set a minimum standard of state troopers at any given time. And the trooper level has been about 400. I believe it's about 400 troopers underneath that level. I don't have that exact number on me right now, but that's the basis for that. So
could they have been overstaffed before?
They've been overstaffed over that.
No, I said could they have been overstaffed before?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, but I mean, I would think there's a reason why the governor set the number of troopers at the number she did, and this was we're dating back over 20 years ago, where the population I think has generally increased since that point.
Not much, but it has.
Yeah, slightly, not by a lot, but slightly. So yeah, that number was set and that was a minimum number. So one would argue that if it's a minimum number that was being set, that's not being understaffed. It's not a being overstaffed number. That's being understaffed if you're underneath that number, because there's a reason why it's a minimum, not a maximum, or even a goal for that matter.
So I want to come back to things that would probably fall under the heading of crime and violence in general, especially that came from that debate. But there's a topic I really want to get to, and that I talked about last week on the show. That I wish there was more time spent on this topic at that debate. And I'm just to give folks background here. Connecticut has, in terms of its financial solvency, has ranked either dead last or second last in virtually every year for the last 12 years, by virtually every outlet that measures this sort of thing. Additionally, I took a poll, and I'm going to have a video out about that, so pay attention, folks. Stay tuned for that, folks. But we're getting polls now from Quinnipiac, and we're getting polls out from Emerson, and they all say pretty much the same thing, and they all give pretty much the same percentages, plus or minus 2 or 3%, 2 or 3 percentage points, that over 40% of the respondents responded that the economy is the number one issue in this election cycle, and by 30 or more points in every single one of those polls. Second is most often the mode, I would say, mean, median, mode. I would say the mode in terms of second place is inflation, is most often inflation, which is very similarly linked under the heading of economics. So these are things too that people undeniably run into every moment of every day, as opposed to some issue that you might run into once in your life. You burn gas every day, you eat food every day, and the price of these things are something that are going to be front of the mind because you see them as often as you do. So on that note, first things first, do you think that there was adequate time spent on these topics at that debate?
I would have liked to have had more of a discussion about the economy. I would have liked to have had more discussion about the state budget. It's budgeted on the backs of $2 billion in federal funds, and I know you've gone over that. And went over the budget on your show. So yeah, I mean, those are two areas where there wasn't really, when you have about an hour and a half or so, or a little less than that, you can't cover every topic, and you certainly can't cover some topics twice or 3 times or whatever. But yeah, I think that there wasn't really a lot of discussion about the economy, and there wasn't really too much of a discussion at all, really about the budget. We kind of just tangentially spoke about it, and it wasn't even really directly. It was more indirectly in terms of the budget that we're facing in Connecticut. So, those are two areas that when I knock on doors and I talk to people, and I've been doing a lot of that over the past 6-7 months here. That is almost always the first topic that gets brought up is the economy and inflation. And as we move into the winter season, it's about heating your home and how expensive that's going to become. You talk to some of the oil distributors, and they're talking to me about the fact that diesel supply, what fuels their trucks to get the oil to everybody, is becoming more and more limited and more expensive, particularly here in this state with some of the taxes and fees we assess upon some of these trucks as well. So, yeah, I would have liked to have had a little more of a discussion on that. I think. Frankly,
So what can first things first, what can and what ought, second, the state be doing, let's say from the seat of from the Senate? What can Hartford do about that? And what should Hartford do about that?
So we have a 25-cent sunset tax that reduced the gas tax by about 25 cents on regular fuel, not diesel fuel. And that currently is ongoing. And unfortunately, it's set to sunset on December 1st. I'm one of the individuals that are running for office, and along with some of my other colleagues, that would like to see that continue. When you're facing 8.3% inflation, that's something that hits at home, particularly 25 cents per gallon. And fuel is increasing every single day.
Well, then why not just tell?
Go
ahead.
What I'd like to see I'd like to see that pass down to diesel. Right now, we're seeing that increase quite steadily. We're seeing the supply go down, which, simple economics will tell you that supply and demand, if supply is going down, the cost is going to skyrocket. And the diesel trucks are becoming more and more important to us because they're delivering the fuel oil that we're all filling up many of our homes with that have oil tanks, which I'm one, and I'm sure many of the listeners here also. So that's going to be a cost that's going to be baked into all the consumers that are going to try to be heating their home this winter as they face record inflation and a crunching budget at home. I think secondarily, and I think we talked about this a little bit at the debate, the truck tax, the mileage tax. It's $90 million in new taxes. It's supposed to be the honor system, that these trucks are going to be paying this additional tax based upon their weight and their highway usage here in Connecticut. It's estimated to be about $90 million in revenue, which means $90 million in new taxes upon those driving the trucks or the owners of these trucks. A lot of these trucks are going to be these diesel trucks that are delivering the fuel to the homes. So that's also going to be baked into the cost. And that's a lot of the reason why some of these oil distributors don't even want to lock in at rates right now because of the upcoming costs that they're going to be facing. So those are two things right now: the 25 cent gas tax that could be passed on to diesel, as well as this new truck tax is supposed to be implemented January 1. Where if we can eliminate that, we can continue the 25 cent reduction on diesel as well. These are all small ways I think we can help address those issues.
So I want to come back to taxes in just like one question. So you talked about supply demand. We've heard about how I guess oil companies are making more than they've ever made in terms of profit or something along those lines. Why wouldn't Hartford just go so far as to say, all right, fine, we're going to cap the price of home heating oil, diesel fuel, and gasoline at $2 a gallon? What happens when that takes place?
Well, you're going to see distributors that are not going to distribute. I would think at that point that we have a we that I really don't see a way that would ever work where you would implement a price cap. I mean, look, if I thought it would work, and the consumers of this state were going to be um, basically paying half of what everyone else in the country is going to be paying, I'd be all for it. But I mean, we just got to talk about what would happen. I think that what would happen is distributors will just stop distributing to the state. They're not going to participate. If they can go to 49 other states and not have a cap on their pricing, or have a far higher cap on their pricing, um, that we're gonna run out of supply. That's really what it would come down to. I mean, look, if I honestly believe that distributors were going to say, okay, all right, don't worry about it, that's fine, put a price cap on us, we'll still distribute to you like always. And our consumers in the state of Connecticut would see, as I said, a price reduction of half of what anyone else in the country pays. I'd be all for it. But I just don't see that the way that would be feasible when you're one state of 50 implementing a cap on pricing.
So we're getting questions actually in the comment section just about that exact thing. So that's great, everybody. We are getting well into our conversation here. We may not get to all the topics I have in my notes, but just a reminder to everybody who's watching at home, both on Facebook and YouTube, if you've got questions for Steve, please get them into the comment section now, and we'll get to them in the Q&A part of this conversation. Steve, it seems like your solutions in terms of helping out the people that are concerned about the economy and are concerned about inflation and the price of everything's going up. I did make reference at least to the financial insolvency of the state. So at some point, taxes are going to wind up needing to be collected. So if we're going to abolish certain taxes, or we're going to significantly reduce certain taxes, that has to be made up somewhere, either through another form of collection or from the other side of the ledger, which is spending. And before we get to the other side of the ledger, what do you conceive of when it comes to taxes? What do you conceive of as the best way to go about collecting taxes in terms of like the form of tax? Because there's a million different types of taxes and ways to collect taxes. What's your vision of how the state should be collecting taxes?
I think the income-based tax generally works in the state of Connecticut. I find that the tolls, for example, is one aspect of taxes, even though it's not necessarily taxes, that has been discussed. I'm absolutely 100% against it. I find it to be the most regressive tax out there. And what they'll do is they can try to implement congestive pricing to basically try to get individuals off the road during rush hours and things like that. So you're going to be paying a higher fee if you're driving at 5 o'clock, as if you're driving the car at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or even later at night. And I think that what I find about that is why it's extremely aggressive is that the individuals that can least afford to pay an increased price are oftentimes most restricted in terms of going back and forth to work. They're on set schedules. And if their employer demands that they're there at 9 o'clock in the morning, then they have to leave their house at 7:30. There's very little wiggle room there. So they're going to be paying a higher price, and then if they're leaving at 4:30 to get out of work, and they're going to have to get home to their families, to either pick up their kids from school or daycare, and start making dinner and get them ready for the evening ahead. So um, I am against regressive taxes, and I think we've seen this effort in Connecticut to continuously collect more and more. And one of the things that we've, as I said, has been discussed as tolls, which I'm adamantly against. And the reason because it's just so regressive. I think the income tax, generally is in place, and I think for the most part in the state of Connecticut, I think that's the general level of taxation we see, or the highest revenue garnerer for the state of Connecticut. Do I like to see an increase in taxes? No. Would I oppose it? Yes, because I find that most of the time, Connecticut, we have a spending problem. We don't have so much of a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. I think for 30 years we've seen um, this mindset in Hartford where we have somehow a revenue problem. That's not the case. We have a spending problem. We've continuously gone into these habits over 30 years. We've entered into collectively bargained agreements. We've paid for hundreds of pet projects worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. We've locked ourselves into other contracts and deals that have set us on a really fiscally irresponsible road. And so I'd like to see more of a focus on the spending side of our budget as opposed to the revenue side of our budget.
Yeah, next time you come on, Steve, if there is a next time, I'm hoping there is.
There will be.
Elected or not, I hope there is. We're going to have to spend some time on the spending side of the ledger. So we can go over the ledger in detail and say, all right, where is it that these spending issues are taking place? We don't have time. We don't have time in an hour to, in the next, 20 or so minutes to really get into the detail that I want to get into. So folks, if you have questions about that, go ahead and ask, and we'll see what we have in terms of time to get into the specifics of that. Now, you made clear a point. I want this point to be made explicitly clear, because there is a growing movement to abolish the income tax here in the state of Connecticut. There are a number of states that have, I would say, had some success in doing that, like Tennessee, New Hampshire, where they've actually seen overall collections increase at the state level. I won't say exclusively because they abolished the income tax, because they've made up revenues in other places, like with a slightly higher sales tax. They've done things like significantly reduce spending and significantly reduce the role of the state in governing. In Tennessee, for example, most of the governing that takes place is at the county level, not at the state level. And to that effect, let's just ask the question: if you had a one-sentence bill plopped on your lap today, and you're in the house today, so we can actually use this hypothetical in real life. If you had a one-sentence bill that was plopped onto your lap that abolished the income tax here in Connecticut, would you vote for or against?
Without any detail, I'd have to vote against it. As much as I'd love to see a reduction in income tax, and I'd fully support a reduction in income tax, you need to see the detail behind how we're going to do this. If it just said repeal it, again, it's a great idea. I'd love to work towards reducing the taxes. I think we have to work towards reducing the taxes if we want more economic growth in our state. We want to see people stay here as opposed to leaving here. So I'm 100% in favor of reducing taxes. But if we're going to phase out the income tax, there needs to be a plan. Where are you going to garner the revenue to pay for the other programs that we have in the state of Connecticut? And if you're going to cut programs, what are you going to cut? So there has to be an action plan to that. I mean, if it's a simple one sentence bill, I couldn't support that. You have to be pragmatic as a legislator and understand how it's going to impact your constituents. And as much as I'd love to reduce the taxes in the state of Connecticut, and I'll be working to reduce the taxes, and I believe we can, we have to do it in a pragmatic manner. We have to be smart about it, and we have to realize one of the things that I'd be nervous about is seeing taxes being raised in other areas to make up for what we're losing in the income tax. So, as much as I'd love to see reduced taxes in the state of Connecticut, I'll be working towards reducing the taxes, but I have to see a plan before I could support anything.
Do you, generally speaking, prefer bills that are if they can be one sentence long?
I like simplicity in legislation. I think we need more of it. But I also need, depending on the circumstance, you're talking about a $40 billion budget being one sentence, essentially, or removing the biggest revenue gainer or garnerer for the state of Connecticut of a $40 billion budget, being and having one sentence related to it. So it depends on what it is. I think there are some bills you could have one or two sentences on, and I think
You actually sponsored a bill that was one sentence long that we talked about with Pat Callahan last week. It was the one you just mentioned to get rid of the mileage. Wasn't the mileage? Yes, the use fee, the use tax on trucks.
Right. So again,
that was a one sentence bill.
One sentence bill. So yeah, there are bills but that I know exactly what the revenue is, and we currently have a surplus that's hundreds of millions of dollars more than what we're removing. So there's not much to tackle there. You can eliminate it, and we have a surplus to come up with, or you can certainly find $90 million in spending that we'd all agree should be removed. So but we're talking about, I don't know off the top of my head what specifically in a $40 billion budget the income tax is, but I'm assuming it's tens of billions of dollars a year.
So perhaps I spend too much time on Reddit, and perhaps I spend too much time on Twitter, but I have to ask the question because there was an implication at the debate that kind of forces me to ask the question. Free market, when it comes to free markets and capitalism in general, if you had to pick between good and bad, which is the word you would use to describe them?
Oh, free market and capitalism?
Yes.
Good. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So then I want you.
Capitalism is good.
Okay.
Free
Capitalism is good. All right.
Good. Capitalism is a good thing. The economy we have in this country is based on capitalism. We built the greatest economy in the world based upon capitalism. Capitalism is a good thing.
All right. So then, into that regard, because we did talk about taxes, there was a quote that your opponent said, and I really want to get her thoughts on this matter. But there is kind of this boogeyman, if you will, and we've talked about it on this show a lot. I've talked it on my channel, Mike Reads, a lot. So I'd love to get your thoughts on the statement, trickle-down economics doesn't work.
Well, I think that what is trickle-down economics, period? I mean, there's no specific definition. If the reference to trickle-down economics is reducing taxes, and that reducing taxes is a bad thing somehow, that it doesn't work, I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I think that reducing taxes is very much a good thing, and that the state of Connecticut needs to reduce taxes, that the tax burden that we place upon the residents of the state is overburdensome, and it's the reason why we continuously see people leave this state. And I think that if in many areas, if we can reduce taxes, I think you'll see, depending on how we do it, and if we're smart about it, we just talked about some of this, and you're pragmatic about it, you could actually see economic growth and revenue growth in some cases from reducing taxes. So, I don't know what the exact particular definition of trickle-down economics is. I think that people call it Reaganomics, people call it other things, and I don't think there's a specific definition for it. But the thought process that reducing taxes is a bad thing is, in my opinion, wrong. It's not a bad thing. I think reducing taxes is something we need to do here in the state of Connecticut.
All right, so then we're going to move on to one more topic from that debate before we go into a quick rapid fire, if you will, before we get into Q&A. So, folks, again, reminder, if you guys have questions for Steve, do get those questions into the chat. We'll forward them as soon as we get into the Q&A section. Which we'll be starting in just a few minutes here, Steve. So I guess the final topic I kind of want to work on, because there wasn't too much time spent on this, but I couldn't quite make out what your thoughts were on all of this. One of the quotes they had for you was, quote, if you're finding, this is related to drugs, if you're, quote, if you're finding dealers who are selling fentanyl, they need to go to jail because they're killing people, end quote. Mm-hmm. So yes. I imagine that you don't want caffeine banned, that you don't want to ban all drugs, because even caffeine is a drug. Okay, so Where do you draw the line between ban caffeine and your statement about selling fentanyl? And what's the basis for that, for where that line gets
What's
drawn?
illegal drugs and drugs that are going to kill you. I mean, fentanyl is one of these things that I think I even mentioned this in the debate. If you have a drop of it, a drop of it can kill an individual. Um, so if you're selling it illegally, you are distributing drugs. You're distributing an illegal drug in a legal manner, and it's so dangerous that it very well can kill the individual you're selling it to. So, what I'd like to see is enhanced penalties for, particularly for fentanyl. I think that you're hearing about it every day. You're seeing terrible, tragic instances in which young men and women are losing their, and I shouldn't even say young men and women, men and women, period, are losing their lives and losing their battle to addiction because fentanyl was slipped into or laced into whatever drug of choice, illegally, that an individual was selling to them. So, that's what I mean by that. Fentanyl is killing people across this country. It's killing people in this state, and individuals that are distributing it illegally should be going to jail and be facing even stiffer consequences than they're facing now.
So the question was about your position on legality in the matter. It seems like there's 2 points that you're bringing up, because if I were to lace somebody's coffee in the morning with fentanyl, right, that's already illegal because there's an element of deceit involved, which is a little bit different from it's going to kill you. So it is going to kill you. If I just take a squirt of fentanyl and just pop it into your coffee in the morning, it is going to kill you. That much fentanyl will kill you. But
yes.
But I think there's two different arguments being made.
Selling it in general. Someone's selling it in general. Yeah, you're right. There's a level of deceit to it, and I think it's the more deceitful you are, the more terrible you are, and the more enhanced penalties.
Allow me to clarify the point I was making. So let's talk about weed, right? So if you have no problem with weed being legal, let's say, then you have no problem with the weed itself being legal. But if there's fentanyl laced into it, it's a little bit different than if, say, they're purposely taking the fentanyl. If they know there's fentanyl in there, because in the case of a lacing, there's the implication of deceit, that they don't know it's there.
I think it's more enhanced. I'm with you there. But I think the fact that you're enabling an individual, even if it's intentional, the individual's purchasing it in a manner where someone's suffering from a terrible disease of addiction, and you're selling something that with a drop of it they can kill themselves. You don't belong on the street selling it. You deserve to go to jail. I think that it's worse. It is worse. I'm totally with you. If someone's deceiving an individual where there's marijuana.
In virtually every fentanyl case, that's the case. In virtually every fentanyl overdose, that's the case.
Where it's marijuana that's laced with it.
It's not marijuana. It's usually something like heroin or some version of some variant of cocaine.
Correct.
Marijuana is extraordinarily rarely laced with fentanyl. The reason you lace heroin, let's say with fentanyl, is because if you do it ever so slightly and don't get the overdose levels, the high that it creates is similar enough to heroin to not notice the difference, and it's way cheaper. So you're cutting it up.
Okay.
That's why the fentanyl's in there.
Understood. And in those particular instances, you as you said, you're being deceitful, which is even worse than selling it, period. And in that cases, you should have faced. And I think that you're exactly right that the far majority of these cases that we're seeing, these overdoses, it's not just straight fentanyl. It's other narcotics, particularly heroin, as you mentioned, being laced with fentanyl. And that's why you're seeing the deaths that you're seeing. And it is a epidemic that we have in this country. It's an epidemic we have, unfortunately, in this state, and we need to do things to end it, because it's killing people. Literally, it's killing people.
Okay, so let's think of so I want to get at this line, and then we'll stop with this topic. Think of a drug which is currently illegal in some way, and that you would be okay with, not favorable to, but let's say okay with, that you might vote for. All right, from a legality standpoint, I'm okay with it being legal in Connecticut. Maybe if there's a lot of regulations associated with that, but in some ways legal. And then think of another one where you would say, okay, no matter what, besides fentanyl, I want to see where that line is that you make the distinction. Like psilocybin, should psilocybin be illegal?
I, well, look. I'm really not. I'm not even comfortable with. As I said, marijuana and weed is legal, and um, I'm not looking to overturn that. I have significant concerns with even that, adding further substances to the problem that we have in this country. I'm safe in saying that I would not support any other narcotic um, being legalized outside of what's already legalized. Period. So weed has been legalized, marijuana is legalized. It's going to be continuously be legal in the state of Connecticut. There's going to be regulations surrounding it. I have concerns about it um, already. I had concerns about it when it passed, but it's passed now, and we have to work with the regulatory structure that we're going to have surrounding it at this point. I would not support any other narcotics being legalized at this point unless someone can make a really strong argument that there's something else like a marijuana that should be legalized. But I don't foresee that in any way, shape, or form. I just don't. I think the marijuana we've legalized it, and outside of that, I'm not interested in the other narcotics being legalized at this point.
All right. Well, I wanted to give you time to expand on that context.
Yeah.
You've had that time. So let's do a quick bit of rapid fire before we go into Q&A. Should only take a minute or two here. I'm just looking for some real quick answers because these really aren't that hard pressing here of questions as we wrap things up. So folks, again, get those questions in. We're about to go into Q&A. You talked about your debates. If I were to be able to get Ava on last minute here at this point, because it is going to be basically last minute, to do something of a virtual debate where I could, agree to a more informal setting in on this channel, would you be willing to join in?
Yeah, I would. I just I don't know with our schedules how that we would be able to do it, but
Let's say we
absolutely,
could. Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So we've kind of seen you just about every. Oh, I want to get into this topic real quick. So I won't have the time to get into this. This is something I really wanted to get into, the Sharon Hospital situation.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in a sentence or two, could you just explain? I'm gonna go ahead and let's see if I can get your post up. Guys, folks will have to. Here we go. There it is. We want it right there. No. All right. So I'm not going to be able to bring it up for you guys tonight. But what's going on with Sharon? You're at an event for Sharon Hospital. What's going on up there? What's the role the state has in that?
So the state approves the licensure, obviously, for these hospitals. And what happened was when New Vance came in and bought Sharon Hospital, they made a commitment with their license for 5 years, at least 5 years, which is their license term. When they bought the hospital to keep the ICU and maternity wards open. And so what you've seen there now is they're not, I think, garnering the profit they want to see, or they're claiming they're not garnering the profit they want to see up at Sharon Hospital because it's more rural, because the population and the individuals that are coming in, it's not as many as you'd see, obviously, at a Danbury Hospital. And so because of that, New Vance is looking to close the maternity ward, to close the ICU, to make significant changes to the ICU. And it's a critical aspect of the community. And so the state of Connecticut has to approve that closure. And I'm opposed to that approval of the closure. I believe the state of Connecticut is not going to approve it. And the number one reason is that they made a commitment to the community when they purchased this hospital. It was for a licensure of 5 years. They told the state, they told the community, oh yeah, don't worry, we're just going to keep exactly the same operations going. So the community made plans around that. And now all of a sudden, not even halfway into their 5-year term, they're turning around saying, well, yeah, no, we're only kidding. We're going to close up these units. I don't have to explain how important a maternity ward and ICU is to a hospital. It's the base of it. It's the most critical aspect of care. It saves lives. So what I'd like to see, and what I'm urging the state of Connecticut is to make New Vance be true to their word here and continue to keep these units in operation.
Enforcing previously agreed to terms to prevent deceit.
Correct.
Right.
Yes, That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, that's understandable. We can go on to that in greater detail maybe another time.
Yep.
Because that's something I really want to talk about, because it's near and dear to us here, to us folks here in New Milford, where we've seen this exact thing happen, and
Exact
we
same thing
know
happened in the Milford.
we know
Yes.
exactly what happens, and you wind up having to go
Yep.
to Danbury for everything. And I'm not about to disparage their name here live while we're streaming here, but I think you guys all know my feelings about Danbury Hospital. Free speech, real quick. Absolutist or draw the line somewhere?
No, yeah, I'm a pragmatist, and I believe that best solutions are pragmatic. I have my principles. I'm not going to bend on many of my principles, obviously, and I think that that's a good representative and a good senator, to have principles and to be uh, strong with the principles, but at the same time, I understand sometimes solutions are found in a pragmatic fashion. So I'm a pragmatist, probably more than anything else. But I do have principles that I strongly believe
Elon buying Twitter, generally speaking, good thing. Generally speaking, bad thing.
in. Well, I'm not on. I don't really follow Twitter too much. I'm on it, but I'm not really on it. So I can't say for certain. I don't have enough knowledge of how Twitter operates right now, frankly.
The correct answer is good.
Fair
Okay,
enough.
so yeah. So I figured I'd have a little fun with the last question here. So, Steve, if you want to just let folks know how to follow and reach you before we get into Q&A here.
Yeah. So as I said, Harding for Senate on Facebook. I'm really not, as I said, truly I'm not a Twitter user, but I do have a handle at Harding for Senate 30, and then hardingforsenate30.com. It's just basically the best way to get a hold of me, frankly, is to message me on Harding for Senate 30 on Facebook. That's where I'm on the most, and that's where I communicate most with my constituents and potential constituents. And so if you need to get a hold of me, shoot me a message. Happy to chat with you, and I'll even pass along my cell phone if it entails more of an in-depth discussion. But absolutely, please do that.
All right. So we got just some commentary I want to address here. Rich
Sure.
Rich Andy says happy Sunday. Rich, thanks for joining in. Happy
Thanks,
Sunday
Rich.
back to you. Ray Lewis, good evening, gentlemen. Ray, he's a regular on the show. So Ray,
Hi, Reg.
so Ray, good evening back to you. Ray then asks a good question, I think. I noticed you're at every event lately, and that's especially true here in New Milford. And I would love if you could answer this question in specific regards to New Milford. How many will you attend in a non-election year?
Just as many. I think it's really important. It's a great question. And my constituents in Brookville will tell you, where I represent now, that it doesn't really matter much between an election year and a non-election year. I think that's the way I can meet voters. And it makes me an available senator if I'm fortunate enough to be elected. So it's a great question, and I plan to continue to be at all the events. You're going to get sick of seeing me after 2 years, so I'm okay with that.
All right then. All right. Well, then in that regard, I mean, are you spending time up in Torrington? Or are you spending time up in that area? Because I know we see you here in New Milford all.
Well, the trip is a little easier from Brookfield to New Milford. It's basically my additional hometown. My wife Kelly teaches at Sarah Noble, so it's my second home, I would say. So it's easy with New Milford. Obviously, I love the other 17 towns in the district, and they're beautiful and they're great. But it's a little bit of a longer trip. But I've been trying to attend as much as possible throughout the 18 towns, and for the most part, I think I've been doing pretty good, hitting everything. I was up in Litchfield on Saturday. I was up in Torrington on Saturday. Then I hit an event here tonight in Sherman. So getting out to all the 18 towns in the district, I think it's critically important, and I hope to continue to do that if I'm fortunate enough to be elected. Because as I said, it's where the constituents can see you and have a good discussion with you about the issues.
Yeah. So Paul Murphy, who is also another regular of the show, has chimed in. Paul says he's watching. Paul, thanks for watching. Again, I do this for you guys. I always do this for you guys. This is not for me. So I always appreciate sincerely, with all my gratitude, the viewers of this show and everyone who comes on, especially the regulars
Paul's a good man.
Take time out of their data, out of their evenings on Sunday to tune into this. Paul, rumors from electrical suppliers are saying there may be rolling blackouts over the winter due to fuel supplies and grid concerns. Picture no electric, no heat. Have you been hearing these same rumors? Have you been hearing anything like that?
I haven't heard it specifically to this year, but unfortunately, with the fuel supply that I've been hearing about and the lack of it, I am not surprised, unfortunately, to hear that. And we did hear that last winter. is that many regarding the grid were saying the same exact thing, that they had significant fears. So I'm not surprised, unfortunately, that they're having the same fears now. And well, that's a whole other topic that we can discuss, and we discussed about in the debate. And I think you hit on it a little bit on your show the last time when you covered the debate, was the problems that we have with the capacity in our grid, and to think about adding on all the electrical vehicles that they want to add on to that. On top of that is just I just don't know how we could. We talk about preparing for things. That's one of the things, obviously, that we have to address.
Okay, we have some comments from Rich Andy, but I'm not sure. They were probably in reference to something that happened 30 minutes ago, and I forget what they're in reference to. Like the government, I don't know what you're talking about there, Rich, but government doesn't like the truck industry. I guess we can expand on that. Do you agree or disagree with the idea that government in general doesn't like the...
Connecticut has recently had a really negative movement in terms of impacting the trucking industry. We talked about the mileage tax that's going to implement about $90 million in new taxes to the industry. We talked about diesel, which many of the trucks operate on diesel. And there was a measure just about a year ago regarding the Transportation Climate Initiative, and it would raise gas taxes astronomically, and it would have a huge impact on trucks, who obviously have huge fuel tanks to fill. So unfortunately, we've seen this movement in Connecticut against the trucking industry, and that's something that obviously that gets baked into all of our costs, because trucks are generally what would provide what provides the transportation to the goods that we buy at our local stores. All
right. Ray says that he's going to hold you to it as far as coming out to all these events in the non-election years.
Please do. That means I get elected, so that's a good thing. So please hold me to it.
All right, Steve. Thank you so much for coming on. If you could just hang on for just a few minutes while I get everything shut down. Just want to send another thanks to everyone who. We managed to get through an episode of the Mike Sennello Show without any technical difficulties. Knock on wood. We've got like 10 more seconds to go. But I do this for you guys, the viewers. So I really appreciate you guys tuning in. And tune in next week. We'll be doing another show, hopefully at our normally regularly scheduled time at 7 p.m. as we try to always do. And hopefully we'll have time to do it next week in the middle of leaf season. Again, thanks again for everyone for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one. Good night, everybody.